Hello and welcome back to my Timeless River toy box for the final time. Today I'm going to implement the logic for the 3 tasks that open the portal to Maleficent's castle, and then I'll be finished with this part of my Kingdom Hearts adventure. If you saw the playthrough video back in episode 1, then you may recall that once the player defeats Pete over at the wharf, that they have 3 tasks that they need to perform. And players can do these tasks in any order they want, and each task is different. So in the first task, which is over here, this is going to be task number 1. The player has to destroy the cauldron in order to activate the sidekick door, so they can toss their sidekick in. In the second task, let's come into spark mode here. Oops. The second task is over here. And in this task, they have to rescue Mickey's older self from, or younger self, I guess, from the Heartless that are going to be attacking him and deliver him to this collection pen in order to activate that door. And then for the third task, they need to collect the parts from the construction site in order to fix this sidekick door so they can activate it. And interacting with all 3 sidekick doors will cause the portal to open. So each sidekick door, when you activate it, will activate one of these runes. And once you activate all 3 runes, that'll open the door to Maleficent's castle. So that's what we've got. So let me show you all the toys that I've placed ahead of time, because there's a lot of them. This isn't difficult to hook up, but there's a number of toys that are needed for each task. So for the first task, we have the cauldron. This is the Brave Cauldron, and that's in the Gameplay Toys drawer. And we have the Dunbrock Sidekick Tree door. That's also out of Gameplay Toys. Both of those are from the Brave Forest Siege game from 2.0. We have a locator, we have a radar marker, a dynamic trigger, and a logic gate. And that's everything we need for task number 1. That's the simplest one. And we'll do that one first in a moment. For task number 2, I've placed our sidekick tree door over here with a locator and a radar marker, dynamic trigger, logic gate. I put the collection pen here. We have a target camera, and you can see it's sitting on top of a little block, and I've only placed that block there just to help you see where that's positioned, so I'll delete that now. And we have a bunch of locators positioned here. We also have 2 enemy wave generators, a friendly wave generator, and a radar marker. The friendly wave generator is connected to the locator in the middle of that collection. This one's connected to the farthest 5 locators. This one's connected to the nearest 5 locators. And we'll look at the waves on those in a bit. That's everything you need for task number 2. For task number 3, we have our sidekick door positioned over here with a bunch of locators spread out like you see. And this enemy wave generator that's connected to all of those locators except the one in front of the tree. And then we have a logic gate, a dynamic trigger, and a radar marker. We also have a collectible tracker and a replayer. Okay, so that's everything for challenge number 3. And then over at the exit over here to Maleficent's castle, I've got 2 blocks stacked up like you see there, with the target camera positioned like so. Okay, and I'll take these out now. And then I have 3 time delayers. We have the Brave color pressure plate, and again that is out of the Gameplay Toys drawer. We have a logic and, a radar marker, an effects generator, a trigger area positioned like so around the Dunbrock gate, and then two locators. This one is right in the middle, and this one is right on the front. And notice which way the little blue dot is facing. It's facing away into the background. And that's everything that we have. So let's start over on this end with task number 1. So for the radar marker over here, we're going to connect that up to this locator. And we're also going to do the same thing with the dynamic trigger. And I'm going to try to go as quick as I can here because there's a lot to hook up. I didn't really want to split this up into multiple episodes, but we'll see how it goes. Radar marker. For the properties on that, we're going to set the beacon type to be a yellow arrow, which is all the way to the bottom. The beacon location needs to be the locator, and the rest of the properties are fine. On the dynamic trigger, for the properties on that, the target needs to be the locator. And the trigger distance for this, I'm going to set this to be 40. Alright, on the cauldron, I think I forgot to configure the wave, so this is how you'll configure the wave for all of the enemy wave generators, by the way. Whoops, not exactly. Let me take that out. Sorry. Delete that. This one is a little different from the others. For this one, we're going to use the Dunbrock bears. And I'm going to use the oak bear, the swamp bear, and the mahogany bear, just 3 of them. Everything else is going to use those swarming symbiotes, as you'll see shortly. Okay, and on the properties for this, while we're right here, everything is fine with this. We're going to take the generation delay to 0, and all the rest of that is fine. And then on the Dunbrock sidekick tree, the Brave sidekick tree door, on the properties for that, we're going to leave this off. We're going to leave that on. That's set to 1. Normal response chance, we'll take that up to 10. We'll leave that one set at 0. Alright, so task number 1, as well as the other 2 tasks, will not begin until the player defeats Pete, which happens off of this enemy wave generator that we looked at last time. So on this enemy wave generator, we're going to do a new logic connection. When the wave is defeated, we want to come over and activate our radar marker for this task. And I also want to turn on the dynamic trigger. So, oops, new logic connection. When the wave is defeated, we'll turn on this dynamic trigger. And I want that trigger off by default, so on our level starter, new logic connection on catalyze, we'll turn off this dynamic trigger because I don't want anything happening over here until we're ready for it in the mission. So if the player wanders over here, we don't want anything to happen. Alright, also on the level starter, we don't want the player to be able to interact with that sidekick tree until we're ready. So on the level starter, new logic connection on catalyze, we will deactivate the sidekick door. So when the player comes in, they cannot interact with this initially. Alright. So now that we have that, let's move this locator up against the base of the tree like you see there. So the player wanders over here, and when they get close enough to that sidekick door, we want to kick off the cauldron. So on this dynamic trigger, new logic connection when entered by player any, we will activate the cauldron, which will start generating those bears, and they'll start attacking the player. And we only want to do this one time, so on the dynamic trigger, a new logic connection when entered by player any. Again, ideally I'd like to turn around and deactivate itself, but I can't, so I'm going to use this logic gate. We'll input into that, and on the logic gate, a new logic connection on output. Come back to the dynamic trigger and turn it off. Alright, so the player battles the bears and they destroy the cauldron. And when they destroy the cauldron, we can turn the sidekick door on. So on the cauldron, new logic connection. When the generator is destroyed, we'll come over to our sidekick door and activate the door. Alright? And then the rest of this is kicked off by the door. So they throw their sidekick in, and on the door we're going to do a new logic connection. When the normal response is returned, and it spits the sidekick back out, we're going to do a number of things. First thing we're going to do is turn off the radar marker. So we'll deactivate that. And then what we want to do is set the first rune over there at the gate on the far side. And there's a number of things that have to happen over here. Since the player isn't going to know that this happened, that's why we have this target camera over here. So we're going to need to turn the camera on so they can see what's happening. And then we need to wait a moment before we actually do anything. And that's why we have the time delayers here. So once a couple seconds have passed, then we'll turn on this first rune. So the camera will be able to show the player what just happened. So hopefully that makes sense to you. If you saw the playthrough video, you can see an example of this working. And that was back in episode 1. So on the sidekick door, new logic connection. When the normal response is returned, we're going to come over to our target camera over here. And activate it. And we'll hook the rest of these toys up over here in a little bit. I haven't set the properties on any of those or anything yet. On the sidekick door, new logic connection. When the normal response is returned, we're going to kick off the time delayer that goes along with that first color pressure plate. And we'll start the delay on that. And we're going to set the delay on each of these 3 time delayers to 2 seconds. Okay? And we'll just do these right here. Right now while we're right here. So 2 seconds is enough time for this camera to get activated and the player to view the scene, and then we'll turn this pressure plate on. So on the first time delayer here, a new logic connection. When the delay is completed, we're going to come over to our first color pressure plate, and you can set these to anything you want. I'm going to set the first one to orange. Okay, and I'm just using this as a visual indicator that something happened. So players can step on this and manipulate it. Unfortunately, there's nothing I can do about that. If you look in the properties, the affected type, there is no none option. So there's no way to prevent the player from changing this after I set it. But the point of this is just to let the player know that something has changed. And by the way, the default properties on all of these color pressure plates are fine. We're not going to change any of those. Okay, so the camera comes on and we show the player what's going on. Now for the target camera, let's connect that up to a locator, and we're going to connect that to the first locator right here. And the properties on this target camera, we're going to use a defined duration of 5 seconds. These are all fine. Glow through, we'll turn that off. The camera target needs to be the connected locator, and all the rest of those are fine. So throwing the sidekick in the door over there, we'll turn this camera on. 2 seconds later, this time delayer will set the rune here to orange. And then 3 seconds after that, after a total of 5 seconds, the camera will turn itself off. So the player will be able to see what that sidekick tree door did. Alright, and that is everything for task number 1. And this is probably going to be a little bit longer video today. Sorry about that. I'm just kind of eager to get this done. Okay, now for task number 2. Once again, we're going to do very similar things. So this is going to be the radar marker for this tree. So once again, connect that up to this locator. Same with the dynamic trigger. We're going to set the properties on this radar marker the same way. So the beacon type will be a yellow arrow. Beacon location needs to be the locator. For the dynamic trigger, on the properties for that, let me make sure I got my right set of notes here. Yeah, okay. So on this one, target, we need to have that set to the locator. And the trigger distance on this one, since this is a smaller area, I'm going to set this to 15. So they need to walk up to the sidekick door or get pretty close to it. And while we're right here, let's go ahead and set the properties on all of these toys. So once again, everything here is fine. Normal response chance, we'll take that to 10. On the collection pen, we want to remove the counted actor. On this target camera, new locator connection, connect that up to the same locator we're going to put Mickey at, Steamboat Willie at. And the properties on this camera, once again, we'll use a defined duration. This time I'm going to set it to 6. Glow through is off, camera target needs to be the connected locator, and the rest of the properties are fine. Alright, on this first enemy wave generator, I've already configured the wave to use 5 swarming symbiotes. And on the properties for this one, we just need to take the generation delay to 0. This one's set up the same way. 5 swarming symbiotes. Properties, generation delay, take that to 0. On the friendly wave generator, for the wave on this one, I've set this to be Steamboat Willie. This is Mickey's younger self. And on the properties here, again, generation delay, we'll take that to 0. And we're going to leave all that, the rest of it, the same, but the generated friend options, we're going to set the behavior to flee. Because younger Mickey is afraid of the heartless. And then this radar marker, we're going to do a new actor connection. We're going to connect that up to the friendly wave generator as our actor. We want to put this radar marker over top of Mickey so we can find him when he's fleeing. And for this, we're going to set the beacon type again to be a yellow arrow. Beacon location is going to be the locator, or no, connected actor, sorry. And the rest of those properties are fine. Okay. So once again, task number 2, just like task number 1, is not going to be available until they defeat Pete. So on the enemy wave generator, new logic connection. When that wave is defeated, and Pete is defeated, we're going to activate our radar marker over here for this tree. And that dynamic trigger as well. And again, I want that off by default when they enter the toy box. So on the level starter, a new logic connection on catalyze. We'll come over to our dynamic trigger, turn that off. And we also want to do the same thing with that tree. New logic connection on catalyze. We'll deactivate that sidekick tree. So once they defeat Pete, we need to turn that dynamic trigger on. So on the enemy wave generator, a new logic connection when the wave is defeated. Come over to our dynamic trigger. Turn it on. Alright, so the player wanders over here, and when they enter the radius around this locator, which we can now move up a little closer to the base of the tree there, when they enter the radius around him, there's a number of things we want to do. So the first thing I want to do is a new logic connection when entered by player any. We want to turn on this target camera over here so the player can see what we're doing, because they're going to be over here around the corner of the building. They're not going to see what's happening in that street unless we show it to them. On the dynamic trigger, a new logic connection when entered by player any. We'll come over to our friendly wave generator and generate the wave. That'll put Steamboat Willie in there. On the dynamic trigger, new logic connection when entered by player any. We will put, put the enemies in there, so we'll generate the wave for both enemy wave generators. And then we want to turn on the radar marker for Steamboat Willie. So new logic connection when entered by player any. We'll activate the radar marker. Okay, and we only want to do this one time. So on the dynamic trigger, a new logic connection, excuse me, when entered by player any, we will input into the logic gate, and on the logic gate, new logic connection on output, excuse me, we'll turn that back off. Alright, so at this point, this will automatically turn itself off. The player will see the enemy spawning and Steamboat Willie spawning. They'll come over here, defeat the enemies, pick up Steamboat Willie, and drop him into the collection pen. And when they do that, then we can activate the sidekick door. So a new logic connection on the pen. When townsperson is entered, we will activate the door. And it's important that you use townsperson entered, because if the sidekick enters this, you don't want to delete your sidekick or have the player pick up the sidekick and just use the sidekick to turn on the door. We want them to actually go after Steamboat Willie. So that's why we want that. Alright, and then on the sidekick door, new logic connection when the normal response is returned, and we'll do the same thing we did with the first task. So we'll deactivate the radar marker. New logic connection when the normal response is returned. We'll turn on the radar, or the target camera over here. And we also want to set that rune. So normal response returned. We'll come up to our second time delayer and start that delay. And on that time delayer, a new logic connection when the delay is completed. We'll come over to this color pressure plate, and for this one I'm going to set it to blue. And there we go. And let me just double check. Yeah, that should be everything over here. All right, task number 3. You can probably already guess how this one's going to go. It's going to be very similar. So a new locator connection on the radar marker. That's going to bring them over here to this tree. And again, we want to connect our dynamic trigger over here up to that as well. On this radar marker, for the properties, again, beacon type, yellow arrow, beacon location, the locator. On our dynamic trigger, under the properties for that, target is the locator. Trigger distance on this one, we're going to set this one to 40. All right, for the enemy wave generator here, the wave is configured to use 5 swarming symbiotes. And on the properties for this, again, take the generation delay to 0. On the collectible tracker, for the properties on that, the collectible type we're going to leave set to all. And we're going to turn on show on radar. And on the replayer, the properties on that will take the playback interval to 0. All right, now before I actually hook any of this up, because I don't want to set this off, I need to put my collectibles down. So I'm going to come out of the editor. We'll step on our replayer to get the menu in the lower right corner. On my Wii U, I press B to start recording, and then I have to step off to get back into the editor. We'll come down to our Gameplay Toys drawer, and there are 2 collectibles that I'm using for the parts that are needed to fix the sidekick door. I'm going to use the Lightning Bolt collectible and the Gears collectible, and we're going to put a mix of those down. So let me grab my screenshot here. So the first one, we're going to place this out here. Player's going to have to do a little bit of a balancing act to get to that. We don't want to make them all difficult though, so we'll place a gear over here. We'll place a gear over here. We don't want a lot of these, but we need a few. So we'll place a gear here. And one of those. And another one out here like that. And I think it's sufficient to do that. If you want a greater challenge, you can stick it out here, and then you have a very narrow area to walk on to get out there, but that's a little brutal, a little too punishing, so this is better, I think. All right, so then we exit, step on the replayer to get our menu back in the lower right, and then I press B to stop recording and A to clear, and that takes the collectibles back off. Alright, so now we have everything set up over here. We can connect the logic. So once again, task number 3 begins when Pete is defeated, but we want to set up a couple things with our level starter. So new logic connection on the level starter on Catalyze. Once again, we want to turn off that dynamic trigger because we don't want anything to happen until we're ready for it. So if the player just wanders around and explores, we don't want anything to happen over there if they haven't reached that part of the mission yet. And on the level starter, new logic connection on catalyze. We'll deactivate that sidekick door. Alright, so once the player defeats Pete, then we're ready to do that task. So once again, back over to our enemy wave generator over here for Pete. New logic connection when the wave is defeated. We will turn on the radar marker for the tree over here. And we need to turn on that dynamic trigger also. New logic connection when the wave is defeated for Pete. Come over to our dynamic trigger and turn that on. Okay, now from here, on the dynamic trigger, a new logic connection when entered by player any. So when the player approaches this area, we want to generate our Heartless. So we will generate the wave. And we only want to do this one time. So on the dynamic trigger, a new logic connection when entered by player any, we will input into the logic gate. And on the logic gate, new logic connection on output. Turn that dynamic trigger back off. Okay, so the player battles the Heartless, and once they defeat the Heartless, then we're going to allow them to get up on top of there and pick up the collectibles. So on this enemy wave generator, a new logic connection when the wave is defeated. We will reset our collectible tracker. And we'll also do a playback on that replayer. So a new logic connection when the wave is defeated. We'll do a playback on the replayer. So then the player climbs the structure, collects all the collectibles, and this keeps track of that. So on the collectible tracker, a new logic connection. When the final collectible is collected, then we want to activate the sidekick door. So then the player comes down here and tosses their sidekick in, and from here, you kind of know the drill. So a new logic connection when normal response is returned. We want to deactivate the radar marker. And did I set the properties on this? I did not. Normal response chance, we need to take that up to 10. Alright, on the sidekick tree door, a new logic connection when the normal response is returned. We need to activate our target camera out here. And start that third time delayer. So new logic connection when the normal response is returned. We will activate or start the delay on time delayer number 3. And when that finishes, new logic connection when the delay is completed. On this third color pressure plate, I'm going to set that one to green. Okay, and I believe that is everything over here. So let me just double check my notes here real quick. Yeah. Alright, so the last thing we need to do is the logic over here, and we're almost done. Okay. So the door, we do not want to open the door to Maleficent's castle until all three of these have been turned on. All three of those tasks have been completed. And so we're going to connect up all three of these time delayers to our logic AND. All right. And on the logic AND, under the properties, we're going to leave the auto reset off. So, on the first time delayer, a new logic connection, when the delay is completed, we will input into our logic AND. Same thing with our second one. Same thing with our third one. And the logic AND will not fire its trigger signal until all three of those input signals have been received. So once they do, we want to direct the player over here. And so for that, we have a radar marker. So we're going to do a new locator connection. We're going to connect that up to the first locator right here. And we're going to go into the properties on that. And we're going to set the beacon type on this one to be a yellow ring. Beacon location needs to be the locator. And the rest of those properties are fine. Okay. Now, for the visual effect, the Dunbrock gate right now serves as a barrier. So that little blue energy that's going between those two uprights is kind of like a force field wall. We're going to need to turn that off. And when we do, we need to show the player that there's an actual doorway that's there. So that's what we're going to use the effects generator for. We're going to do the same thing that we did for the doorway into Timeless River. So we're going to do a new locator connection for that. We're going to connect that up to this locator in the middle of the trigger area. And again, note the way the blue dot is facing, because that's important. Alright, so when this logic AND is completed, then we're going to invoke the last part of this. So on the logic AND, a new logic connection, when this is complete, we're going to come over to our Dunbrock gate, and we're going to open it. That'll turn off that force field so the player can walk through there. On the logic AND, a new logic connection, when complete, we're going to turn on this radar marker. On the logic AND, a new logic connection, when complete, I want to activate this trigger area. And I want this deactivated by default when you enter the toy box, because the player just wanders over here and steps into that trigger area. I don't want anything to happen. They have to go through the quest to activate it. So on our level starter, we'll do a new logic connection on Catalyze. And we'll come over to the trigger area and deactivate it. So then it'll remain deactivated until the player finishes all three of those tasks. And then we want to give the player the visual effect for the gateway. So for that, when the logic AND is complete, we come to our effects generator. We're going to play Looped out of the Flashes category, the Magic Vortex. So just like what we did in the Disney Castle toy box for the gateway to Timeless River. And then the last thing we need to do is invoke the toy box door. And I've already placed the toy box door underneath the terrain. And on the properties for this, the destination, we're going to create a new toy box, a new empty toy box. And I'm going to set the name of this to be Maleficent's Castle. And I'm typing that into my gamepad here. There we go. And we'll save. That's creating that third toy box and linking it to this door. So then on our trigger area up here, new logic connection when entered by player any. Come down to our toy box door and change the level. And that's everything. So that's it for the logic in this toy box, which means this toy box is now done. Next time I'll show you how to build the final toy box in this adventure, Maleficent's Castle, where the final battle takes place. Before you go, let me remind those of you who are building this toy box on your own systems that I have logic diagrams on my blog that may help you out. The link is in the video description. Also, if you like my toy boxes and you haven't subscribed yet, just click my photo in the lower right corner of this video. Thank you for watching, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.